Chapter 2, Ass Freak. Han Sen was stunned by the sudden voice in his head, and he could hardly believe it was true. Sacred blood creature and sacred blood beast soul, were those even real? The creatures of God's sanctuary were divided into 4 parts: ordinary creatures, primitive creatures, mutant creatures and sacred blood creatures. Different genopoints could be gained by eating flesh of creatures of different types. At that time, there were 4 God's sanctuary phases known to men. With each physical evolution completed, access to the next space would be permitted. The more powerful the genopoints used in evolution, the higher the likelihood of surviving in the next space. Sacred blood beast souls were without any doubt the best beast souls. Any sacred blood beast soul could be sold at an enormous price. When Han Sen finally realized what had really happened, he was almost trembling. Holding the dagger to pick open the shell of the black beetle, he filled his mouth with meat as tender as jelly. Flesh of black beetle eaten. 1 sacred geno point gained. Feeling the flesh turn to energy and hearing the voice in his mind almost brought Han Sen to tears. He grabbed a claw and sucked out all meat from it, feeling waves of energy hitting his body and boiling his blood. There was not much difference between eating a sacred blood black beetle and eating a crab. After sucking the meat clean from all 6 claws, Han Sen started to cut the meat inside the shell. Flesh of black beetle eaten. 1 sacred geno point gained. Flesh of black beetle eaten. 1 sacred geno point gained. The strange voice continuously sounded in Han Sen's mind and made him feel on top of the world. As Han Sen was cutting away, he felt his dagger cut into something hard that made a sound like metal. Han Sen stopped. Black beetles and crabs are alike. They looked tough, but inside their shells there would be nothing but boneless meat, so how could there be metal? He removed the dagger, pulled aside the meat that had been cut, and saw a corner of black metal. Han Sen cut open all the meat surrounding it, and soon the black metal was completely exposed. At first he thought it was metal, but taking it out, he discovered that it was a black crystal the size and shape of a pigeon egg. Han Sen took the crystal in his hand and didn't feel anything abnormal. The crystal was just like a beautiful, rounded black pebble. But with a closer look, there seemed to be millions of stars shining in it, creating incredible beauty. Here is the easiest area in God's sanctuary, Han Sen thought. Even primitive creatures are hard to find here, let alone sacred blood creatures. How did this sacred blood black beetle suddenly appear? And I've never heard of a sacred blood black beetle before. Black beetles are such low life after all. And this sacred blood black beetle is so outrageously weak. Is its appearance related to the crystal? There was no clue, so he simply ate all the rest of the black beetle meat and was stuffed. He gained a total of 7 sacred geno points. 7 sacred geno points were beyond his wildest dreams. With his background, he needed to risk everything even to kill a primitive creature, let alone a sacred blood creature. The shell of the sacred blood black beetle was also precious material, so Han Sen picked up all the claws and stuffed them into his pocket, together with the upper and lower shells. The shell of ordinary black beetles almost had no value, but the shell of a sacred blood black beetle would probably make a soup that could give him 1 or 2 more sacred geno points. It was the first time Han Sen had eaten a sacred blood creature. Technically he could max out and get 10 sacred geno points. He already had 7 from the meat, and the other 3 should be in the shell. If he were to sell the shell, he could probably afford a nice private aircraft in Levo Interstellar Alliance with the money he received. On the way back to Steel Armor Castle, everyone was pointing at him, gloating and laughing, and no one would come near him. Everyone in the sanctuary was looking at him as if he were a monster. Normally, when an ordinary person went to the sanctuary, even if he were poor, if his martial skills were not too bad, he could always find some companions and kill a few primitive creatures together, and he would be nowhere near as miserable as Han Sen. However, in the entire Steel Armor Castle, no one was willing or had the courage to have anything to do with Han Sen. More than 3 months ago, Han Sen had entered God's sanctuary for the first time. The moment he stepped outside steel armor shelter, he saw a giant white wolf unicorn standing with its back towards him around the corner of the rampart. Without hesitation, Han Sen grabbed his dagger and fiercely stabbed the unicorn in the ass. This stab turned Han Sen and Qin Xian together into the biggest laughing stock in steel armor shelter. Yes, the white wolf unicorn was not a beast, but a human like Han Sen himself. She was just transforming using a beast soul. Qin Xian was also the most powerful woman in steel armor shelter. She was likely to finish her first evolution with sacred Geno points and embark on the path of evolution. A new guy stabbing Qin Xian's rear end became the biggest joke in steel armor shelter. Although no one dared to mention this to Qin Xian's face, secretly everyone was laughing their asses off. And "ass freak" became Han Sen's well-known nickname in steel armor shelter. Then Qin Xian declared that whoever spent time with Han Sen would become her enemy. In steel armor shelter, few people could afford to be Qin Xian's enemy. Even if they could afford it, no one would risk antagonizing Qin Xian for the sake of a nobody and ass freak. That was why Han Sen had such a difficult time, but he didn't really blame Qin Xian. It was his fault in the first place. He was too nervous the first time he came to God's sanctuary, plus he had never seen creatures in his previous world or transformers before, which all led to the unforgivable mistake. Han Sen was already grateful that Qin Xian did not kill him in anger. The only lucky thing was that the teleportation into God's sanctuary was always random, and there were no familiar faces in steel armor shelter, so no one knew his real name. Chapter 3, Sacred Blood Armor. Han Sen returned to his room, made a fire, and started boiling the black beetle claws and shells in a pot. Without tools and know-how, he could only use the most primitive methods to process the shells and extract the Geno essence. The shell of a sacred blood creature would take more than an hour or two to cook, so Han Sen covered the lid and took out the black crystal to take a closer look. Still, no clues whatsoever. Suddenly, Han Sen caught a glimpse of the caged green-scaled beast the size of a civet cat in the corner of his room and suddenly had an idea. Like black beetles, this green-scaled beast was an ordinary creature. Han Sen used to prey on them and bring them back to cook and eat to increase his Geno points. But later, green-scaled beasts no longer increased his Geno points, so Han Sen didn't eat the last beast and forgot about it. Surprisingly, it was still alive. He grabbed the moribund green-scaled beast from the cage, hesitated for a moment and was about to feed the black crystal to the beast. To his surprise, seeing the black crystal, the dying green-scaled beast gathered all its strength to stretch out its tongue, roll the black crystal back into its mouth and swallow the whole crystal. There is indeed something magical about the black crystal. Han Sen was stunned and found that the green-scaled beast seemed considerably more lively after swallowing the crystal, its foreclaws scratching and head moving to bite Han Sen's hand, which was on its neck. Han Sen threw the green-scaled beast back into the cage and carefully watched it. The beast, which hadn't fed for days, completely recovered its vitality, thrashing and scratching wildly in the cage, just like it had when it was first caught. Han Sen sat across from the cage and watched the movements of the green-scaled beast. He had a guess, and if he was right, he might have obtained something incredible, something more exciting than a sacred blood creature. But Han Sen was afraid he was wrong, so he could only stare at the green-scaled beast anxiously, hoping to see the change that he desired. Han Sen nervously stared intently and did not realize that he was starving until he smelled bone broth from the pot. Looking at the time, he noticed almost 24 hours had passed. Rising to check the black beetle shell in the pot, he saw the golden color of the shell had been boiled off and the broth had become golden. It smelled so good that the hungry young man's mouth watered. About to scoop up a bowl of soup, Han Sen suddenly heard iron breaking from the cage of the green-scaled beast. He quickly turned around and saw the green-scaled beast had bitten off an iron bar of the cage and stretched out his head from the inside. Its light green scales had now completely turned a dark green color. Its teeth had become sharp and the tips of its foreclaws were like iron hooks. The beast was about to come out of the cage. Han Sen was pleasantly surprised and pulled out the dagger from his waist. He rushed to the front of the cage and stabbed the dagger into the lower belly of the green-scaled beast. With a turn of the dagger, the green-scaled beast stopped struggling. Primitive creature green-scaled beast killed. No beast soul gained. Eat the flesh of the primitive green-scaled beast to gain 0 to 10 points randomly. The strange voice sounded in Han Sen's mind and left him stunned. Primitive green-scaled beast. Primitive creature. So the crystal can really make these creatures evolve. Han Sen was overwhelmed with joy and did not know how to react. After a long time, he suddenly cut open the green-scaled beast with the dagger and uncovered the crystal as big as a pigeon egg. Taking no heed of the blood on it, he kissed the crystal twice and then wiped it clean, holding it in his hands like it was a great treasure. The crystal was really the reason the black beetle became a sacred blood creature. If the green-scaled beast had continued to evolve, could it have become a sacred blood creature too? Han Sen almost dared not think about it, because it was just too amazing. He was so excited that his hands were trembling while holding the crystal. He bit his tongue and cried out of pain so as to know that it really was not a dream. After remaining excited for quite a while, Han Sen carefully put the crystal away, gobbled up the shell broth, and gained another sacred Geno point, bringing his Geno point count to 8. Without tools and means, his primitive method couldn't extract all Geno essence from the shell, but it was good enough that he gained 1 sacred Geno point. Han Sen realized that he had gained a sacred blood beast soul of a black beetle when he killed the golden black beetle, and he quickly accessed his profile. Han Sen, not evolved. Status, none. Lifespan, 200 years. Requirements for evolution, 100 Geno points. Geno points gained, 79 Geno points, 8 sacred Geno points. Beast soul gained, sacred blood black beetle. Type of sacred blood black beetle's beast soul, armor. What would the armor of sacred blood black beetle's beast soul look like? Before Han Sen finished the thought, a golden shadow shot out of thin air, looking exactly like the golden black beetle. The golden black beetle flew to Han Sen's chest, turned into a golden liquid and started to cover his whole body. In the blink of an eye, Han Sen's whole body, together with his hair, was all wrapped up. The streamlined gold armor was full of power and impact, and covered his whole body as if it were a suit of Gothic medieval armor instilled with improved aerodynamics. It looked just like a piece of art. The whole suit of armor felt full of power and speed, making Han Sen look slender and majestic, as if his whole body were full of explosive power. With shining metallic luster, the armor was gorgeous and had a solid texture. At first glance, it was even somewhat like the gold cloth worn by golden saints. The difference between the gold cloth and the beast soul armor was that the armor covered the head and body completely, with only a few gaps in the joints where different pieces overlapped, just like the black beetle itself, which was the only weakness of the beast soul armor. Han Sen moved around in the armor and there was no feeling of heaviness or clumsiness. Instead, he felt that his body had become a little lighter and full of energy. Indeed, this was armor from a sacred blood beast soul. It is way more gorgeous than the ones from primitive beast souls that I often have seen at steel armor shelter. Han Sen felt ecstatic. He used to envy people in armor of primitive beast souls and had never thought he would get a suit of a sacred blood beast soul one day.